So today, I want to discuss something that most people in Washington are not saying out loud, and I want to say it clearly because the data forces me to. A 2-week ceasefire was announced between the United States and Iran 3 days ago. The world exhaled, stock markets surged, oil prices fell back toward $90 a barrel, and President Trump posted on Truth Social claiming again that America had won. But here is what I want you to understand today. The ceasefire is not a resolution. It is not even close to a resolution. It is a pause on top of a problem that has not been solved. And today I'm going to show you step by step exactly why this ceasefire is already collapsing before the ink is dry, what that collapse reveals about the structural trap America and Israel have walked into, and what the next 48 to 72 hours will force every party to do next. Because right now, as you are watching this, J.D. Vance is on a plane to Islamabad. Iran says it has not confirmed who it is sending to those talks, and the Strait of Hormuz, which was supposed to reopen under the ceasefire terms, is still effectively closed. Most commercial shipping companies have told CNN they will not send vessels through the strait because the risk is still too high, and Iran has not provided a clear, safe passage framework. Let me say that again. The ceasefire was announced. Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the strait is still closed. That is the situation this morning. Now, before I get into the analysis, I want to go back. Not far back, just 40 days. Because you need to understand how we arrived at this moment. Because if you understand the sequence, the current situation stops looking chaotic and starts looking like something far more logical and far more dangerous. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched what they called a preemptive strike on Iran. The Pentagon named it Operation Epic Fury. The Israeli Defense Ministry said the strike was launched because it was expecting a missile and drone attack from Iran in the immediate future. Explosions were reported across Tehran. Roads near the compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei were shut down, and within hours, Iranian state television confirmed what no one had expected to confirm on day one. Khamenei was dead, the most powerful figure in the Iranian state for 35 years, gone in the first 24 hours. Trump posted on Truth Social. Netanyahu went on television. Both said the same thing. This was necessary. This was justified. This was the beginning of the end of the Iranian threat. But here is what I want you to think about carefully. When a country kills the supreme leader of an adversary nation in the opening hours of a war, it is signaling something very specific. It is signaling that the goal is not negotiation. The goal is not a deal. The goal is decapitation. The goal is regime change. And the moment you announce that goal publicly, you remove the adversary's incentive to ever give you what you say you want through diplomacy. Because if the other side believes you are trying to remove them from power, regardless of what they agree to, they have nothing to negotiate with. They only have two options: fight or surrender. Iran chose to fight. And the way Iran fights is not the way America expects. Let me give you the framework I use to understand what is happening. I look at three things. First, I look at structural constraints. What are the hard physical limits on what each side can actually do? Not what they say they can do, what they physically can do given their resources, their geography, their time. Second, I look at what each player actually wants, not what they say they want. Because in every conflict, the stated goal and the real goal are almost always different. And third, I look at the cost exchange. Who is paying more per day of this conflict? Because the side paying more per day always runs out of willingness first, even if they have more total resources. When you apply those three lenses to what is happening right now, the picture that emerges is not the one being presented in Washington. Let me walk you through it. First, what does America say it wants? America says it wants to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. It says it wants to stop Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. It says it wants peace and stability in the Middle East. Those are the stated goals. Now, what does America actually want? America wants the Strait of Hormuz open. That is the immediate operational reality. 20% of all traded oil and natural gas flows through that strait in peacetime. Iran has had it functionally closed for over 40 days. The U.S. military estimated the cost of the war to the American military at $18 billion as of March 19th. The Pentagon then requested an additional $200 billion. By March 31st, the cost to Arab countries in the region was estimated at over $120 billion. And oil prices, which were already elevated, are now only beginning to fall back from the surge created by the closure. This is the economic weapon at the center of this conflict. Not nuclear weapons, not ballistic missiles. The Strait. Now, what does Iran say it wants? Iran says it wants the right to enrich uranium. It says it wants its sovereignty respected. It says it wants the war stopped. What does Iran actually want? Iran wants America to accept a permanent red line. The red line is this: American military force cannot be used as a tool to achieve regime change in Iran. Full stop. Because every time America has tried to negotiate with Iran in the past, it has broken the agreement. The nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was signed in 2015. Trump tore it up in 2018. The February 2026 indirect talks, which Oman was mediating, reportedly showed significant progress. Iran was willing to make concessions. Trump then said he was, quote, not thrilled with the talks. The talks collapsed. And 3 weeks later, Israel and America struck. From Iran's perspective, negotiating with America does not protect Iran. Only deterrence protects Iran. And what Iran has now demonstrated, not with nuclear weapons, but with the Strait of Hormuz, is the most powerful deterrence tool a regional power has ever held over the global economy. One analyst at Johns Hopkins put it this way: Iran's real deterrence does not come from a potential nuclear bomb. It comes from the ability to stop or regulate traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. That is a chokehold on 20% of global oil and gas trade. And Iran proved it works. Now let me give you the structural facts of where this ceasefire actually stands right now, because this is where the analysis gets important. Structural fact number 1. The ceasefire terms are already disputed. Iran's parliament speaker stated this week that 2 of the mutually agreed upon points have not been implemented: a ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of blocked Iranian assets. He said these 2 matters must be fulfilled before negotiations begin. The United States responded by saying it never agreed to include Lebanon. J.D. Vance told reporters that Iran may have had a, quote, legitimate misunderstanding and that the U.S. never made any promise about Lebanon. But here is the problem. Pakistan, the country that mediated this deal, publicly stated that the ceasefire included a halt to all fighting, including Lebanon. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a fundamental disagreement between the mediator's stated terms and what Washington is now claiming it agreed to. Structural fact number 2. Israel has not stopped fighting. The day after the ceasefire was announced, Israel launched what it called its largest wave of strikes on Lebanon since the start of the war. More than 300 people were killed in Lebanon in a single day. Hezbollah said it paused attacks on Israel. Israel continued striking. Lebanon's health ministry confirmed the casualties. Iran responded by halting oil tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz again, citing Israel's Lebanon strikes as a violation of the ceasefire framework. This is the critical structural problem. The United States announced a ceasefire. Israel immediately violated the spirit of that ceasefire in Lebanon. And Iran holds the lever that determines whether the ceasefire means anything economically. The moment Israel strikes Lebanon, Iran closes Hormuz. The moment Iran closes Hormuz, the ceasefire is functionally dead regardless of what documents were signed. Structural fact number 3. The cost exchange is still running against America. This is the fact that almost no mainstream analysis is discussing honestly. Iran fired missiles that cost tens of thousands of dollars each at targets including Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American military base in the Middle East, which was struck by a ballistic missile confirmed by Qatar's Ministry of Defense. America's interceptor missiles cost between $3 and $10 million each. Iran's missiles cost a small fraction of that, and America has been moving Patriot air defense missiles from Europe to the Middle East at a scale that the Associated Press reported is, quote, leaving concerning gaps in Europe's air defenses against Russia. Lockheed Martin announced it is accelerating Patriot interceptor production from 620 per year to 2,000 per year by 2030. The deal was signed in January. That tells you something. America went into this war already planning for the fact that it would burn through interceptor stockpiles faster than it could replace them. The production acceleration was arranged before the bombs started falling. That is not confidence. That is contingency planning for a resource drain that was already visible before the first shot was fired. Structural fact number 4. The new Iranian supreme leader has taken a harder public line than his father. Mojtaba Khamenei, the younger son of the late Ayatollah, is now in the position of supreme leader. His first statement was not a call for negotiations. He said Iran will bring management of the Strait of Hormuz into a new phase. He said Tehran remains determined to take revenge for his slain father. He is not signaling compromise. He is signaling that the killing of his father has made the Iranian position less flexible, not more flexible. This is the opposite of what the architects of Operation Epic Fury predicted. The theory was that removing the supreme leader would create a power vacuum, accelerate domestic dissent, and force a successor to negotiate from weakness. What actually happened is that a younger, more hardline successor took control, used the killing of his father as a unifying narrative, and has publicly stated that Iran's hands remain on the trigger. Now here is what I want you to understand about the player mapping in the ceasefire talks, because this is where the strategic situation becomes genuinely dangerous. What does America want from the Islamabad talks that begin today? America wants Iran to commit to surrendering its enriched uranium, to stopping all nuclear enrichment, and to reopening the Strait of Hormuz permanently. Trump said this week that the U.S. would work with Iran to, quote, dig up and remove enriched uranium buried by joint U.S.-Israeli strikes in June 2025. He added that none of the material had been touched since. What does Iran want from those same talks? Iran wants America to rule out any future military action. It wants the release of frozen Iranian assets. It wants sanctions lifted. And it wants Lebanon included in the ceasefire. And here is the part that no one in the mainstream Western media is framing correctly. Those two sets of demands are not close to compatible. They are not even in the same negotiating universe. America is asking Iran to permanently surrender the capabilities it used to force a ceasefire. Iran is asking America to permanently surrender the option of using force against Iran. One side is asking the other to become structurally defenseless. And neither side is going to agree to that. Not in 2 weeks, possibly not in 2 years. Now let me give you the two scenarios I see from here, because this is the heart of what I want you to understand about the next phase of this conflict. And which scenario plays out depends on one critical question. Does Netanyahu stay inside or outside the ceasefire framework? Scenario 1. Israel agrees to restrain its Lebanon operations long enough for the Islamabad talks to produce a partial framework agreement. In this scenario, Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz functionally open under its own terms, meaning ships that coordinate with Iranian armed forces can pass. The talks in Islamabad produce a preliminary document on nuclear constraints. No final deal, no normalization, no removal of U.S. forces, which Iran is demanding and which CENTCOM has publicly said is a non-starter. But a document exists. Trump declares victory. Iran's new supreme leader says the Islamic Republic's core principles were respected. The war pauses. But here is what this scenario actually means structurally. Iran still has its ballistic missiles. Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's new leadership has been hardened, not removed. And the Israeli-Lebanon conflict continues. So in scenario 1, the war pauses, but none of the underlying conditions that created it have changed. The trap remains set. It is just temporarily unsprung. Scenario 2, Israel continues striking Lebanon at the current scale. Iran responds by closing the Strait of Hormuz again. The Islamabad talks collapse before they begin or within the first session. Trump issues another ultimatum. Iran refuses to comply, and the United States is forced to make a binary choice between backing down publicly or escalating back into active combat operations. This is the scenario that Defense Secretary Hegseth was signaling when he said at the Pentagon press briefing on April 8th that U.S. forces will, quote, hang around and are prepared to restart at a moment's notice with whatever target package is needed. The military has not left. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, nearly 20 warships, and more than a dozen air squadrons remain deployed in the region. The military is physically positioned for Scenario 2. The question is whether the political leadership in Washington has the will to execute it, given that Trump is simultaneously trying to take credit for a ceasefire he announced less than 72 hours ago. Now, I want to address 3 questions that everyone watching this conflict is asking, because the answers reveal the real stakes. Question 1. Has the U.S. actually degraded Iran's military enough to win a permanent settlement? The honest answer is no. U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said Iran's nuclear facilities were destroyed and it would take years to rebuild. The Pentagon put the estimate at 1 to 2 years, but the IAEA director assessed that Iran could resume uranium enrichment in a matter of months because the country has, quote, the industrial and technological capabilities to rebuild. Meanwhile, Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, according to senior Israeli military intelligence, still contains over 1,000 operational ballistic missiles. The IDF's own top intelligence officer acknowledged this week that Iran can keep firing missiles as long as the war continues. You cannot bomb your way to a negotiated settlement with a country that can keep firing missiles indefinitely and can close 20% of global oil trade with a command order. Question 2. Does Israel want this ceasefire to hold? The evidence of the last 48 hours suggests the answer is no. Not because Israeli leadership is irrational, but because Israel's strategic goal and America's strategic goal are structurally different. America needs the Strait of Hormuz open. America's economy and its global credibility depend on it. Israel needs Hezbollah dismantled. Israel's northern communities have been under fire for months. For Israel, a ceasefire that leaves Hezbollah intact in Lebanon is not a ceasefire. It is a pause before the next round. And so Israel continues striking Lebanon precisely because Lebanon is its non-negotiable. Trump has asked Netanyahu to be, quote, a little more low-key in Lebanon operations. Netanyahu responded by approving direct talks with Lebanon, while simultaneously launching Israel's largest wave of strikes on Lebanon in this entire war. That is not compliance. That is the message of an ally that has internalized that Washington needs the ceasefire more than Jerusalem does. Question 3. What happens at the Islamabad talks this weekend? Iran has not confirmed who it is sending. The Iranian parliament speaker has publicly stated that 2 preconditions must be met before negotiations begin, and neither has been met. An Iranian senior official told the Associated Press this week, quote, we remain cautious and our hands remain on the trigger because we do not trust them. That is the starting position of the party that is supposed to be negotiating in good faith in Islamabad in the next 24 hours. This is not a negotiation between 2 parties that are close to a deal. This is a negotiation between 2 parties that have fundamentally incompatible red lines, that do not trust each other, and that are both facing domestic political constraints that prevent meaningful concession. Trump cannot agree to Iran keeping its nuclear enrichment capability. Iran cannot agree to surrendering the Strait of Hormuz leverage it just proved actually works. That is the structural deadlock at the center of the Islamabad talks. Now let me connect all of this to the deeper pattern, because this conflict did not come from nowhere. Go back to one structural reality. America has fought 4 major wars in the Middle East in the last 30 years. The Gulf War in 1991, Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, Iraq from 2003 onwards, and now Iran. In every single one of these wars, America won the first phase, the air campaign, the shock and awe, the decapitation strikes, and in every single one of these wars, the question of what comes next produced a deteriorating answer. Afghanistan took 20 years before America withdrew. Iraq is still not stable. And in this war, America killed the Iranian supreme leader on day 1 and is now in a fragile 2-week ceasefire 40 days later with a new, younger, angrier supreme leader in place, an unresolved nuclear program, a still threatened strait, and an ally in Israel that is actively working against the ceasefire's survival. The pattern is not hard to identify. America can destroy. America has proven it cannot convert destruction into durable political outcomes in the Middle East. That gap between military dominance and political resolution is where every American campaign in this region has ultimately broken down. Now here is my prediction, and I want to be clear, I may be wrong. This is game theory and structural analysis, not prophecy. Prediction 1. The Islamabad talks this weekend will produce a framework document, not a deal. A framework with enough ambiguity that both sides can claim it represents their position. Iran will say it did not surrender enrichment rights. America will say Iran committed to nuclear constraints. That document will be used by Trump to extend the ceasefire by another 2 weeks. But the fundamental issues will remain unresolved. Prediction 2. The Lebanon question will fracture the ceasefire before a permanent deal is possible. Israel will not stop striking Hezbollah. Iran will not accept a deal that excludes Lebanon. And at some point in the next 2 to 4 weeks, the Hormuz closure will be reimposed, not because Iran wants full war resumed, but because Iran has learned that Hormuz is the only lever that actually moves Washington. Iran's new supreme leader already signaled this. He said Hormuz is entering a new phase. That is not a statement of restraint. Prediction 3. The permanent settlement, if it comes, will be structured around one core trade that no one in Washington is currently saying publicly: American acceptance that Iran retains the right to civilian nuclear energy, in exchange for Iranian acceptance of intrusive inspections and a verifiable halt to weapons-grade enrichment. That is the deal that could hold. It is also the deal that the Trump administration went to war to prevent having to offer. Getting from here to there requires Washington to accept that 40 days of air campaign, $18 billion in military costs, the killing of the Iranian supreme leader, and the closure of 20% of global oil trade produced a negotiating position that is not dramatically stronger than the one Oman was mediating in February. That is a very difficult thing for any administration to acknowledge, but the structure of the situation is what it is. The Athens that launched the Sicilian expedition in 415 BC was the most powerful force in Greece. It sent its best military capacity to achieve a decisive outcome in a single campaign. The expedition destroyed the Athenian navy. Athens never fully recovered its dominant position. America did not lose this war in the traditional sense, but it has spent 40 days, $18 billion, 2 carrier strike groups, and the credibility of multiple regional alliances to arrive at a 2-week ceasefire that its own vice president called fragile while it was being announced. The Strait of Hormuz, which carries 20% of global oil trade, remains under effective Iranian control. The Iranian nuclear program, which was the stated justification for the war, remains partially functional and potentially recoverable within months. And the Iranian state, whose removal was the unstated goal, remains standing under new and younger leadership that has publicly declared it will take revenge. None of that is a victory. The question now is not who won the air campaign. The question is whether Washington can find a political exit that costs less than the military campaign that created the current situation. And that is the question that J.D. Vance is flying to Islamabad to try to answer today. Whether he finds one is what will determine whether this ceasefire becomes a peace or whether the trap that closed over the last 40 days simply reopens. So that is the analysis. The ceasefire is fragile. The talks face structural incompatibilities on every core issue. Israel is actively undermining the framework that America needs to work. And Iran holds the economic lever that makes walking away from negotiations extremely costly for Washington. This is not resolved. This is a temporary suspension of a problem that has not been solved. Follow this channel because the next 48 hours out of Islamabad will tell you whether this pauses for another 2 weeks or whether it reopens into something far more serious. The most important thing is not to take any single government's framing of this as final. Governments declare victory when they need to. The structure of a situation tells you something different. And right now, the structure says we are not at the end of this. We are at the beginning of the negotiation phase of a war that neither side fully won.